Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a great lunch. My name is Alayna Ynacay-Nye. I'm from the School of Humanities and Social Sciences here at Nagasaki University, and I will be chairing session 2 on climate change and risk. This session brings together 2 presentations that correlate with climate-related risks from different perspectives, including energy transition, governance, and economic and business institutions. This session will be a little bit different from the first session. We'll have our presenter, and then we will have our discussant speak, and then we'll open for a Q&A, and then we'll move on to the second presenter, discussant, and then a final Q&A at the end. So just to get started really quickly, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Nanda Kumar Janardhanan, the Deputy Director on Climate Change from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies here in Japan, who will speak on climate and energy transition in the Asia-Pacific interlinked dimensions of it. Okay, thank you so much.
You can use either this, or if you want, you can use this.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really a great pleasure to visit the university and have this opportunity to speak before all of you. I would like to, first of all, I would like to thank my friend and Professor Tomoko Kiyota for facilitating this invitation, and thank Professor Shikimi for inviting me. And I also would like to extend my appreciation to Eguchi-san for all patience she has shown to me for all the communication. So my topic here today is energy transition and climate, especially in the Asia-Pacific context. One of the points I wanted to highlight is that when we talk about energy transition in the traditional form of discussion, I'm using the term traditional bit freely here, or the established way of interpreting energy transition or discussion of energy transition, we often ignore certain very important elements. And those are the 3 elements I wanted to talk about here. I mean, there are quite a lot of elements, but I would like to specifically highlight 3 elements in my presentation. What you see here, okay, yeah, what you see here is some very interesting, clean, green images. And this is what the images which I got when I started looking at what is energy transition. I mean, what I can actually use some pictorial examples to show about energy transition. And as I said, clean roads, you know, there are not much traffic. You can actually see a picture which shows about EV and somebody using some mobile phones and everything. And all these gives us an image that energy transition, the entire energy transition, the process is actually like sort of taking us forward and is also sort of very green, clean image. But in reality, things are much, much different. Energy transition is a very complex process, and that also involves several challenges, especially in the region of Asia Pacific. So as I mentioned, I'll be focusing on 3 dimensions of energy transition that is discussed but not given importance or weightage in the usual debates. Here what you have is the global renewable energy snapshot and 2024 headline. Basically, this shows the figures in terms of achievement of renewable energy development across the Asian region, across the world. And what we have seen here is that renewable energy share has significantly increased. If you look at the year-on-year growth of renewable power capacity, there's a 15% increase you can see. Overall, this picture looks very interesting because we are making significant progress. Now, in this entire journey of energy transition across the world, as you see here in this figure, Asian region takes the lead because Asia has about 2,382 gigawatt of installed capacity. Compared to many other regions, Asia stays much, much ahead. And in terms of electricity production also, you can see this Asia Pacific region has been increasingly, playing a major role. And there's substantial increase in Asia in the electricity production. But the fact here is that the energy usage in the Asia Pacific region shows that we are significantly reliant on fossil fuels. Coal and coal products constitute about 49% of the total energy supply. Oil and oil products have about 23% of total energy supply. So basically speaking, even though there is transition happening from the fossil fuel based energy consumption, energy mix to a clean energy mix, the region still dependent heavily on fossil fuels. And sources of electricity generation also has, you can actually see that there is significant share of coal and other fossil fuels are actually like making a major share. So coming to Asia's energy transition, and if you look at the current state of play in the Asia's energy transition, there are certain different elements which we need to pay attention. First of all, as I mentioned, energy mix is still dominated by fossil fuels. And energy demand is increasing in all the countries, especially in India, China, and even ASEAN countries. Policies are there to address energy transition, but the transition trajectories and policy initiatives to address energy transition and climate mitigation are not well aligned across countries in the region. In terms of climate targets, countries have different targets. India has 2070 as a net zero target, China has 2060, and some of the ASEAN countries also have like 2060, 65 as the targets. So you can actually see there are diverse targets across the Asian region. So by the year 2050, which is mostly widely seen as a net zero target for many countries, you can see pockets of transition across Asia, while many of the Asian countries will still be heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Now, I would like to highlight three dimensions that I mentioned as often spoken but not discussed much. These are, number one, about technology transfer. Second, the role of critical minerals. And the last one is about climate security. These three, especially the last two, have significant role, significant importance in the theme of today's conference. So let me start looking at them one by one. I'll start with the last one first. How climate-induced security challenges affect transition, energy transition, and just transition. Now, climate change has often been seen as an environmental issue for a long time. Scholars have been comfortable in talking that in silos and not discussing it in terms of connecting it with other elements in terms like security aspects, national security aspects. Interestingly, early 2000s, you can see that there have been a lot of debates about climate security, and especially in the US, in some part of Asian countries and all, you could see that there have been quite a lot of discussions about climate and security interface. But somehow that debate has actually vanished. And the interesting thing now is that it is again coming up in academic as well as policy circles. And what you see the figure here is a work in progress which we are currently undertaking as part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs fund, where we are working on Asia Pacific climate security project. So our work identifies that climate change definitely has a linkage with national security, and because it has several implications on health, alternative energy facilities, food, maritime trade, water resources, as well as traditional security aspects like military operations, border issues, and military personnel's health, everything. So climate change can have direct or indirect impacts on traditional as well as non-traditional security dynamics. And that's what actually we have tried to categorize them into human security, food security, maritime security, energy and peace, economic security. Those are actually are often termed as non-traditional security as well as traditional security. All these together have significant role in influencing national security. So as this figure shows here, climate security has direct and indirect impact on national security. So if we are unable to address climate change issues, and if we are not able to transition to a clean energy future, in one way or other, we are sort of sacrificing our national security. Some of the examples I would like to show here is that energy transition often faces significant challenges due to extreme weather impacts. And as you see in this figure, this is a solar farm which has been affected by extreme weather event. It was flood and typhoon. So similar occasions can affect energy transition initiatives, can damage infrastructure, can affect investments countries are making towards energy transition. One of the recent examples I would like to show here is that in 2020, extreme weather related events led to a reduction in renewable energy by 31.79 terawatt. This was actually in the case of China. And in 2050, projections are actually showing that these impacts can be much more significant. One of the most commonly discussed topics which we all know is that countries are also facing existential challenge, existential threat due to climate change. The island of Tuvalu is being displaced, and you might have read in the newspaper that Australia is giving special visas to people of Tuvalu Islands to come and live in Australia. So this is basically, it shows that how climate change is also affecting other parts of life in different ways. So when we talk about energy transition, in the energy transition context, the biggest discussion which we have to have is that there are countries which are affected by climate change differently, and all countries' ability to address climate mitigation, or all countries' ability to address climate change related risk are different. And these aspects have to be taken into account when we look at energy transition and when we try to design regional policies. Second element I would like to highlight here is critical minerals. As we all know, I think maybe around 10 to 20% of all the equipment which we use today have some sort of minerals and metals which fall under the category of critical minerals. Critical minerals are basically those metals and minerals which are geographically scarce, and mostly its reserves are concentrated in certain geographies, and that's why its supplies and trade makes things difficult. We also must have heard that how critical minerals trade has become a point of contention, especially in the case of certain countries, bilateral relations. For example, you must have heard news about how China and United States have been, at war of words, sometimes in terms of critical mineral supplies. So these minerals are extremely important in energy transition, especially in building clean energy technologies. And that is why you may see that countries are always putting their control on the trade of these elements. So geopolitical challenges and transparency of supplies are one of the most important elements we often see in discussion about critical minerals. But what is more important about critical minerals is that the environmental, social, and economic issues associated with the critical mineral value chain. How? One of the examples is that the mining in several resource-rich countries. For example, as I indicated here, Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the countries with richest nickel resources. There is significant level of deforestation happening in Indonesia. And since nickel mining and processing brings them some sort of revenue, somehow the government has not been paying much attention. And quite a lot of these mining and processing are done by some of the major mining and processing players, including China. So there have been some concerns about how this value chain, to what extent this value chain is able to give attention in terms of addressing the environmental and social issues associated with it. The photo which you see in this slide is from Democratic Republic of Congo. This is taken by a friend of mine, Ruben. He's an investigative journalist. And Democratic Republic of Congo, Congo is very popular in terms of critical mineral mining. Most of the copper and cobalt mines are located in Congo. So that means the entire electricity supplies as well as batteries which we use are because of these mining activities in Congo. But these mining and processing activities are also leading to a lot of environmental pollution, dust pollution, water pollution because of mining tailings, land degradation, and so on. And this photo shows that a newlywed couple standing on the road, and as you see, they're completely covered in dust. And Ruben's objective of this photograph is that he wanted to show that this is the average life that happens there. Everything is polluted. And somehow these countries, even though they produce significant quantities of these critical minerals, which are important for energy transition. They do not get a major share of these benefits of this produce. Similarly, in several other countries, say Latin American countries or many other African countries, because of this mining activities, forest resources or forest land are being polluted and completely sort of destroyed. And in some of the places, as you see in the water pollution, I mean, this is a kind of the level of pollution which you can see in many of the mining areas. That means these are not drinkable, these are not good for use of agriculture or even for any animals' use. These are highly poisoned water resources. So while the world is extracting critical minerals for energy transition, the producing countries are being sidelined and are being cornered, and they are basically facing all the negative challenges of this value chain. And this has to be addressed. This is something which we hardly discuss when we talk about energy transition. I would like to recall your attention to the first image I showed. When we talk about energy transition, we think of green, clean, and efficient environmental images. But the reality is this is something which we definitely need to pay attention to. And there are a lot of other important aspects related to critical minerals, especially policy changes we need to take in terms of we need to think about demand side management. We need to think about improving recycling and research and development. All those things are required in this sector so that the demand for critical minerals can be reduced, so that demand for newer mines can be reduced. The last element I would like to highlight here is about technology transfer. I'm sure that all of us are familiar with the term technology transfer. But in reality, we do not see much of transfer of technology. What we have seen, if you look at the entire history of technology transfer, what we have seen is that sale or subsidized trade of finished products, especially from the global north, from the global south. And technology or the real know-how of that advanced equipment or machinery was hardly transferred. Now, in the context of climate mitigation, we know that technology will have to play a very important role in accelerating climate mitigation or accelerating energy transition. Now, for this, if we are still trying to depend on the traditional model of technology transfer, where we try to bring in the finished products from one place to other, that may not be able to scale up the benefits in the recipient country. So in our research, in the research which we have been conducting at IGES, the traditional technology transfers have only been giving narrow focus on transferring finished products. They have been, because of this narrow focus, there is a restriction on benefits to specific geographies. And most of these occasions, you can see that they have been, cost is a big concern. And this cost was often subsidized, like, some temporary support was given by some subsidies and grant and all. So technology transfer has been surviving in this way. Now, we cannot think of accelerating energy transition if you still think about continuing the traditional technology transfer elements. And this is a context we have been working on the theme or point of co-innovation. What is co-innovation? Whatever base idea or a technology which is from one place will definitely cannot be, or it cannot be applied in another geography. Basically because you have to always have to take into account the importance of the recipient's context. We often, one of the examples which I would like to cite here is that as part of the clean technology transfer, which we have been working on, we tried to transfer some heat pumps from Japan to India. This was done in 2014. And heat pumps are actually definitely an advanced equipment which gives a lot of benefits in terms of energy saving, in terms of energy efficiency, everything. But most of these heat pumps, when we brought in from Japan to India, most of this equipment or machineries failed to operate or encountered some problems within 3 months to 6 months. And we started actually looking at what problem is it encountered. So there were multiple challenges. Number one, there were not adequate people to operate that machinery in a proper way. Second, weather conditions. The particular machinery was made to stand the weather conditions in Japan. It probably cannot actually operate in a high temperature weather conditions in some parts of India. And third, when a machinery fails, definitely there is a need for an ecosystem to support that machinery. That means there should be spare parts, there should be engineers to support, there should be immediate consultation available, there should be adequate power to operate that machinery, all those. So we identified there are multiple elements are lacking and we need to overcome these challenges. And that's why we started looking at technology co-innovation. And technology co-innovation is basically about jointly innovating, developing and scaling up advanced technology solutions. Maybe this concept looks a bit complex at the first instance, but some of you, if you know this example, this could give you an easy way to understand. I do not know how many of you are familiar with Maruti Suzuki, an automobile company operating in India. Can you tell me how many of you? 1, 2, okay, great. Thank you. So at least I'm happy that at least some 5% of our audience know. So Maruti Suzuki is a joint venture company. And in India in 1971, a small company was started by the then Prime Minister's son, and his name was Sanjay Gandhi. He was Indira Gandhi's son. So he started a company in 1971 calling it Maruti Motors Limited. And in 82, Suzuki Motors from Japan invested in that company and they wanted to develop it as a joint venture. And if you look at the market, Maruti Suzuki cars are sort of a household name. Most of the people who live in India, their first car is often Maruti. And today, Maruti Suzuki has got over 40% of market share. Like any company can, better than any company can have in any other geographies. Usually, even if you look at Suzuki's market share in Japan, it has only about 16% of market share, while Nissan and Toyota must be having about 30%. Nissan and Suzuki must be having about 16% each or something like that. So Maruti Suzuki, with the Suzuki's joint venture, they have over 40% of market share in India. How did they reach from that initial small joint venture to this level? And that is where I would like to link it with technology co-innovation. That joint venture did not focus on one-time technology transfer. They looked at mutual value creation beyond their market entry. they looked at technology co-innovation, not just transfer. Whatever technology Suzuki has brought in first, it was improved, refined, accommodated consumer needs from India. It was designed in a way that it stands the Indian roads, Indian weather conditions, Indian customers' demands, and all those. So every stage you can see there was improvement of technology was done. And there was institutional learning. Maruti Suzuki is a platform for most of the Japanese companies to enter India today. Even Toyota, even many other companies which they want to enter India, they utilize Maruti Suzuki's platform in terms of the virtual as well as physical infrastructure. So because they have developed an ecosystem. There's a very beautiful advertisement about Maruti Suzuki that somebody is riding a bike in some of the mountainous regions of India, and they suddenly stop somewhere because they need to drink some water. They ask a child that, do you see any hotels or something here? Then the child says that, oh, there are no hotels, but you can see a Maruti Suzuki workshops nearby. So that is the kind of presence Maruti Suzuki has across India. And they have over the years, over this 40, 50 years, they have developed trust across institutions, across consumers, everyone. And Maruti Suzuki is also giving a lot of socio-economic co-benefits. It is giving employment opportunities, it is giving educational opportunities, and lot. So this kind of system is probably something which we need to think about replicating when we are thinking about technology transfer. Technology transfers usually get limited to certain geographies, certain consumers, and that is why many of the technology transfers fail. So technology co-innovation should be the way when we look at climate mitigation, especially because considering its urgency. And there are several differences. I mean, when you look at the technology transfer and co-innovation, because co-innovation is usually locally led, there are joint R&D, there are opportunities for local production, and there are co-financing opportunities, there are benefits from the local knowledge base. While in technology transfer, everything is source country based. And at a time of, sometimes if the adequate support doesn't come from the source country, things can be challenging. So the purpose of highlighting these three elements here was only to say that there are certain important aspects we need to consider, we need to look at when we are focusing on climate mitigation and energy transition. And these are risks and opportunities when we look at energy transition. So I'll stop here, and I would like to thank all of you for your attention and thank the chair for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Janardhanan, for your very informative presentation. I think one of the key messages from this presentation was that the climate change or energy transition should not be idealized. In fact, it comes with many challenges, and we will continue to have many challenges in this sector, especially in the Asia Pacific, because it is so incredibly and beautifully diverse. But with that comes a diverse array of challenges and risks that we have to consider when we're thinking about regional development. And I think the very interesting co-innovation strategy is really important when we talk about transitions, because it not only is just about kind of copying and pasting technology in one country to another, but it's also kind of creating these opportunities to learn adaptive strategies and resilience together due to the differing contexts. So thank you very much for that informative presentation. I would now like to invite our discussant, Dr. Masayo Shikimi, to give her comments and questions about the presentation. And then after, we will move on to Q&A.
Good afternoon. My name is Masayo Shikimi, and I'd like to thank you, Professor Nanda Kumar, for your very insightful presentation. And let me summarize what he said at first, and I'd like to make some questions about your slides. Okay. So first of all, he presented the current status of energy transition in the Asia-Pacific region. And, the fact is that the Asia-Pacific region still relies on heavy fuel of fossil fuels. And actually, 70% of the energy is on fossil fuels. And also the important thing is that the growth of energy demand is higher than the growth in renewable energy. So we cannot match the pace and of the growing demand. And especially this demand is high in India, China, and ASEAN countries. So, and this highly dependence on this coral means that our economy is quite vulnerable to transition risks, such as carbon pricing mechanism, and also the more stringent climate commitments or regulations. So we have to do something to reduce this reliance and also to lower transition risks. And he mentioned 3 aspects about challenges in energy transition. And the first is technology transfer and the critical mineral value chain and the impact of climate risk on security. So what I think is very striking is that extreme weather is also creating vulnerability in energy infrastructures. And also these effects, the effect of climate change and also the more toward the transition energy has a heterogeneous effect, and the effect is different between developing countries and developed countries. And also they have differentiated capabilities. So advanced economies have a stronger infrastructure and R&D capability and financial resources. But when we think about more developing countries or lower income countries, they lack financial and technological powers. And also they don't have the good financial system or financial resources. So this is quite challenging. And also as to the trade of critical mineral and geopolitical challenges, Asia's supply chain is highly concentrated. Only one country dominates 70% of this market, and this is very, very concentrated. And so it means that there are some risks, I mean political risks, and also it affects value creation in the region. And so we have to consider about those kind of things. And also Yeah, so he said quite well about the technology transfer and its problems, and he insisted the importance of co-creation. Okay, so now we face many challenges for transition to clean energy, and there are many issues, and I don't think I can tackle or we can tackle all of them at once. So which ones should be prioritized if allowed? And when we prioritize things, what kind of indicators should we use? And what are the constraints? I mean, well, ideally, we can do all the things, but we have budget constraints. And some people said that green investment is very costly and it's not profitable. And why should we do that? So we have to think about these kind of things. And also, so the problem is that we produce our GHG emission a lot. So we have to reduce GHG emission. But as doctor said that the speed of energy demand is higher than the speed of the supply of clean, clean energy. So, and also now we are facing another challenge is that AI is more increasing, and we estimate there is a growing demand for electricity because of the AI. So it is quite difficult to suppress the demand for energy consumption. And also the farms are required to reduce GHG emission, and they have to disclose scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And that means that the farms are responsible for their own, not only for their own emission or the transport, but they are also responsible for the emissions through supply chain. So they have to think about it. However, as doctor said that each country has a different net zero target. For example, Japan and South Korea said that 2050, but India 2070, and other Asian nations 2060 or 2065. So when Japan and India, there are 20 years differences. So supply chain is quite really developed in the Asian Pacific regions, but each country has a different goal, so different stage. So, but the farm has to reduce the scope 3, the GHG emission in the supply chain. It's quite difficult to tackle these matters with just one country. We need to consider these kind of situation and coordinate each other about the target. And also, as I have told you, that some said that green investment, thank you, is costly and risky. So we have to encourage the firms. Green investment is costly, but it is also profitable. Or if there is no benefit for firms, it's quite difficult for firms to adopt this green investment. So, and some scholars find that the greenium in the green bond issuances, that means firm can obtain credit with lower cost, but we are not sure whether these have a lasting effect. And so this is the slides that I translate from the techniques, and it shows that this is the effect of the global warming on the labor's productivity and also the global income. And when the temperature rises by 3 degrees, then the darker color means the negative effect is more severe. And you can see that these darker colors are found in Africa and these Asian countries, and mainly the developing countries. But we also see some developed countries also affected because our economy is highly integrated, through the supply chain and international trade. So this, as doctor said, that this impact of global warming is also the matter for the developed countries. So we have to do something, but how first should we move toward the target? So think about when you go to the station. When you run to the station, then you reach an area, but you get tired. But when you walk to the station slowly, maybe you will not get tired, but you may miss the train, and it's too late. So we have to think how fast we will achieve the target. But as I have told you, and Dr. said that there is differences in the net target policy, and it is quite different. And also, when we achieved the net zero target, and when we run first, there's a lot of costs. We have to sacrifice many things, as Dr. mentioned. But when we walk slowly to the target, then another climate-related disaster will occur, and we cannot cool down the Earth. So these kind of things, we have to think about it. And there are some hindrances. So how should we overcome these problems? So I have two questions about the presentation. So if we are allowed, how can we prioritize these issues, and what kind of standards should we use to prioritize the things? And also, how fast should we move toward the target with these hindrances?
Thank you, Dr. Shikimi, for your interesting questions regarding the presentation. I would now like to invite both our discussant and our speaker to sit at the front, and I will first give the opportunity, go ahead, please. I would like first to give the opportunity to maybe answer or perhaps discuss the questions raised, and then open the floor to questions from the audience.
I didn't think of this seat actually. So thank you, Professor Shikimi, for first of all summarizing my presentation in a very in an excellent manner, and secondly also highlighting some of the very challenging questions. Definitely the answers are not easy, because if the answers were easier, then definitely countries would have already implemented it. Now the biggest challenge about energy transition and the concerns we have is that all these challenges operate in multiple levels. So just by taking one set of action, we won't be able to address if you look at the speed of energy transition or the intensity of energy transition or any of these aspects. So, when we look at the from the multi-layer perspective, like based on Gill's study, one of the biggest challenges in, when you talk about technology transfer, and at what kind of role a technology transfer technology can make change, or to what extent it can make change on a new society. It depends on how that technology is being adopted, from how it actually moves from the niche to regime and then to the upper layer. So the biggest challenge for a technology to move is between the niche and regime level. The reason is that when you introduce a new technology to a new geography, there are existing players. They definitely do not want you to bring in a new technology. For example, in any country, the companies or the industries which were against solar power introduction was the existing power companies or coal or oil companies. So the incumbents have a big role in resisting a change. So from technology, and the reason is that incumbents see that newly introduced technology doesn't make much or doesn't give them much profit or bring them more challenges. So there is a risk perception there. And how do we address that? And that's a place where technology co-innovation as a policy, if governments can streamline that, say that technology transfer has limitations, technology co-innovation benefits both incumbents as well as new entrants, and that sort of a narrative has to be there. There has to be institutional support, there has to be policy support. So specifically on the technology transfer, this is one issue. The second element is that I'm not an economist, but I'm sure many of you are here, economists, and we usually talk about Lucas paradox. Why capital doesn't flow from the developed countries to developing countries, even though its expected returns can be much higher. Now, Lucas paradox, to break that Lucas paradox also, you have to, if you can actually showcase that collaborating with a developing country in jointly developing technologies or fine-tuning technologies will have only lesser risk, then that is something, that's one way we can easily break the Lucas paradox and present that technology collaboration or flow of capital from the developed world to developing world will have more returns. So that is something that's a convincing argument. So in both the contexts which I mentioned, that multi-level perspective where niche to regime transition is seen as a difficult phase, as well as in the Lucas paradox, we can propose technology co-innovation as the best way to address it. Now, there are many other areas which needs to be addressed. For example, you mentioned here that, one of the newer areas you mentioned as that AI and emerging technologies will give or will present a bigger demand for energy. Countries are addressing it differently. For example, one way countries are currently thinking is to move out data centers to other countries. If Japan actually wants to move out its data center to some other countries, definitely the electricity demand is going to be from the newer geography. And there need to be policies to ensure that such moving of data center will also have supporting policies for that newer geography to develop cleaner energy resources. So there has to be supporting technology transfers, there has to be supporting finance, capital flow. If you look at currently what is happening in many of those geographies, for example, if you look at India, India has come up with a new nuclear energy mission, which says that by 2047, India wants to expand its installed nuclear capacity to 100 gigawatt. And that is mostly in view of the demand surge in all fields, including the AI and demand for newer data centers. So there are pockets of energy demands are going to happen, and there are challenges in terms of over-reliance on fossil fuels. Now, all these things cannot happen in a traditional context of north-south engagement. We definitely have to unlock a better engagement mechanism between global north and global south. Otherwise, as you mentioned as you saw in the data which I showed, Japan has 2050 as a net zero target, China has 2060, India has 2070. So with the multiple targets, you're going to miss a train, as you rightly pointed out. So you walk or you run to the station, but this is, considering that there are difference in capacities, there is an urgent need for developed countries to accelerate their support to developing countries in terms of finance, in terms of technology, everything. So this is probably like my take, which covers almost all the areas which you mentioned, that, accelerating north-south collaboration. I'll stop here and then I'll see if there are any more comments or if I missed out something.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Janardhanan. I would now like to open the floor to comments or questions from our audience members. Yeah. She'll bring the microphone to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Milan Bektursunov. I'm from Hokkaido University, so I'm not the specialist in this topic. It's a fascinating topic, fascinating presentation. And excuse me if I'm looking at this problem from a little bit different perspective. So I'm a historian of the Central Asian region. So in Central Asia, there's a huge problem of climate change, as everywhere in global south. And there's no cooperation between the states. So you just mentioned about the cooperation between the south and north, but what about the cooperation between the south countries of the global south? And when we say about the cooperation within the global south, we often talk about the egoism of the national states. First comes the egoism of the national elites, which translates to the egoism of the national states. So to take this power, political power, as much as long they want to, they are overlooking on the other very important issues. So can you give us your perspective on the cooperation within the global south and egoistic actions of the national elites and nation states? Thank you.
I think that's a very interesting way to look at from a historian's point of view. So, and thank you so much for that question. You're right, actually, South-South collaboration is often more difficult than North-South, considering that there is a clash between nation states' priorities within the global South. So probably that is also justified to some extent because global South, you can see more competition for resources, fund, talent, everything, and they're also encountering multiple challenges which the global North probably isn't going through currently. In terms of technology access, availability, affordability, global North is definitely much better placed. In terms of issues such as addressing the fundamental socioeconomic challenges like maybe poverty or health impacts and these kind of things. So quite a lot of these issues make the global South focus more inward rather than across countries. I'll stop here because there is a notice shown to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation and the discussion points. Round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would now like to invite our second speaker, Dr. Nhan Lee. She is a senior lecturer at the Australian National University who will speak on regulating the rigs, how employment protection laws shape CEO compensation.
Okay. Let's change the slides. Sorry.
So good afternoon. So good afternoon. This is my pleasure to be here. I am Nhan Lee from Australian National University. Firstly, thank you very much for the conference organizer for the invitation, and especially Professor Shikimi for inviting me here to Nagasaki. So it's actually my first time to be here, and I really enjoy my visit so far. So today, I actually move the conversation right from climate change to another topic. So this topic today is about something relating to income inequality. So I'm gonna just want to motivate the research question to you all. The reason why we're interested in this type of question. So the first motivation that I got, and I think this is one of my research interests as well for many years, is that I think like there is a phenomenon that's very significant, especially this one is in the US. So as you can see, the statistic from EPI showing that for the last 20 or 30 years, this is an increasing trend for CEO compensation. Right, and at the same time, we observe the worker compensation only increase 18%, like for more than 30 years. Okay, I don't think that it is even sufficient to cover inflation rates, like on average about 2%. Right, so as you can see here, the gap between CEO compensation and worker compensation. This one is in the US, but I believe that the phenomenon is very common in other countries as well. So it is actually rising a lot, you know. So the literature is actually attracted to this phenomenon, and there are many studies, try to understand the reason why. CEO compensation rising too fast, right? At the same time, it looks like the worker compensation didn't really enjoy the benefit and the economic development, at the country level on aggregate. So this rising difference between the CEO compensation growth rate and the worker pay is actually the very hot topic and the headline in many newspapers. So here, this is actually the very recent news, and they keep highlighting. This is from the US, that the average CEO to worker pay is actually rising to even more than 600 times. Right, and they look at the statistic for the U.S. that paying the lowest wage, So and I remember in this article they also raised, for example, the retail chain like TG Maxx, very popular in the U.S., and they say that the average worker pays even more than 500 times. So this is very striking, and. Like how does that actually, matters here, right? So maybe CEO create value and they be able to enjoy, right, these benefits and these rewards in their pay. However, there are a lot of, studies have highlighting that, the rising income inequality, especially like income CEO pay and the worker pay, is actually the main, I would say, income spectrum distribution, right? And this is going to account the major population portion. This actually can cause, like the rising crime. Okay, and I think like the literature also showing a lot that, you know, when you observe a rising income inequality like this, it's actually also matters for not just crime, as we can see now in the US, it's also the polarization of ideology, right? So US now is actually a very, very striking example for us to see that, you know, maybe this is just a coincidence, right? Or maybe just a correlation. What we observe that they suffering a very rising income inequality, and at the same time, the polarization in ideology, you know, also happen as well. And you know, you can see that if we consider at the view of angle for this conference about risk, it's actually a significant global risk, right? In terms of crime, in terms of terrorists as well. So this is the paper that I, just an evidence, right, in the Journal of Law Economics, is a journal of University of Chicago. They also document, you know, a very strong evidence in terms of inequality and violent crime. And this is not just within countries, it's actually the evidence that we can observe internationally. So in this paper, oh yeah, and I think like this has also been, you know, a target, right, to reduce the inequality problem for the UNDP. So it's not, yeah, so at the same time we concerned about climate change, but on the other social side, right, so it's actually causing a significant risk. Okay, so in this paper, we try to look at just CEO and the worker pays, okay? I think in particular CEO. So the workers, the rising is actually the motivation for us. So regarding the legislative effort around the world, right? So there has been a lot of effort at the government level. They trying to kind of restrain, you know, the rising growth in the CEO pay. For example, here is the law regarding say on pay. So what does it mean here is that this type of law is actually regulation is actually allow shareholder to vote, you know, like on the CEO pay. However, this regulation is not really binding. So it's more of the just for transparency and public scrutiny. So what does it mean? I mean, if it goes to the headline, you know, it can somehow encourage the board to restrain the significant rise in the CEO pay. So for example, the country like UK, US, Australia, Sweden, Netherlands, they actually have the regulation on say on pay. On the other hand, they also have a lot of regulation regarding disclosure, transparency, compensation ratio guidelines. So they encourage firms to really disclose the difference between CO pay and the average workers. You know, so they try to attract more public attention, you know, on the rising of CO pay. Another one is the cap, like the limit on the tax deductibility on CO pay. So for example, in the US, there are several states that they impose the pay ratio surtax. So if the CO pay gap between CEO and workers higher than a certain level, in this case it's 100 times, then the CEO expenses is not going to be tax deductible. At the federal level, like in the US, in 1993, they also introduced some kind of the limit on tax deductibility on executive pay. And then in 2018, right, so I think the SEC regulation, I think mandate the disclosure requirement as well. So they try to raise, you know, the public interest on how much CEO earn every year in the corporate environment. So in this debate, you know, there's actually a very debatable topic, right? Because there's always a pro and cons in terms of how much we should restrict the CEO pay. The reason is, you know, on the social equality, I mean like equality sign, there's always a demand, right? Oh, CEO pay shouldn't rise too much. However, on the other hand, people gonna argue that the CEO pay is important, right? Like Elon Musk, right? So we see a lot of argument to support this because they're gonna say that this is the way to incentivize CEO, right? For value creation. So the biggest challenge here is what? The biggest challenge here is the trade-off, right, between firm value and managerial incentive. So if we restrict, or we intervene too much on how firms pay their CEO, there's gonna be some distortion in managerial incentive. Okay, so what we are doing this research question, so we're trying to see, right? So I think this is kind of something relating to the two spectrum of the income distribution. So the first one is workers and the other one is CEO pay. So we're trying to see how the EPL, so this is the employment protection legislation, is gonna shape the CEO pay. So how the benefit that workers on average enjoy, have an effect, like impact CEO pay. And how does it gonna affect, how does it gonna change the design and the managerial incentive of CEO pay? So let me have a few minutes to just give you, because I understand that, many of you not in finance area. So just to discuss briefly regarding the employment protection legislation, what do they mean? And what actually the objectives, right, or limitation of this. Okay, so employment protection legislation across all over countries in the world is actually, we're talking about a set of rules, okay, governing the hiring and the dismissal on labor contracts. For example, there's gonna be some regulation regarding worker rights, promote welfare, and also regulation in terms of working condition. And most of the aspects, right, the condition that they, in the regulation is about layoff protection. So it's actually differ across countries. So some countries allow, layoff easily. Some countries actually put a lot of limitation. Also something about minimum wages or working hours. Okay, and the provision here normally include, for example, they need to provide a certain advance notice for the dismissal or severance payment or something like unfair dismissal, okay? So all over the world, the EPL here is very significantly. So as you can see, I think there's gonna be two signs, like two kind of very extreme, right, that we observe is European and the US. Okay, I think Japan may be somewhere in the middle, or maybe not really in the middle, maybe lean toward to the European side. So the European countries, as we know, that the EPL is very stringent, okay? So the protection for workers is very high, and it enforced by many things, and one of them is the collective bargaining arrangement. So the union, I think, for example, as I know in Germany, there is a representative of union in the board, okay? So whatever countries, the firms want to do in terms of CEO pay or anything, they actually have a vote, okay, in the board. So that is super, labor protection. I mean, very high level of labor protection. On the other hand, we know that US or even UK, they got a very flexible regime, and they actually leave room, right, or maybe I would say discretion to the firm level. So firm totally can decide, how much protection that they're gonna provide to their employees. Okay, so what the literature have shown, right, relating to EPL. So what would be the limitation? What would be the benefit for having, a certain level of EPL? So the advantage, as we know, right, the EPL is actually increased job security. They're gonna protect workers, okay? And the literature, for example, in this paper, they show that there's some evidence that the EPL is gonna promote the formation of long-term, okay, employment. So they're gonna encourage employees to stay longer for a company, and from there, they're gonna incentivize employees to accumulate, expertise. Okay, so there's some benefit in there. Okay, however, there's also a lot of evidence showing that EPL is actually causing a lot of problem. So the first thing is it's actually increasing the adjustment cost for firms. For example, in the US, if you observe on news, right, whenever anything go wrong, right, in the market, firms can easily slash like 20-30% of their employment. And because of that, what does it mean? That means firms in the US, they have low adjustment costs, right? However, if we compare firms in Europe or even in Japan, the adjustment cost is higher, okay? And it's actually restrict the managerial flexibility on how they're gonna respond to the shock. So there's a lot of evidence showing that it actually reduces labor mobility, and it also have a very ultimate effect on economic growth, right, in terms of productivity. Okay, so in this paper, we formulate the hypothesis, try to explain how EPL, can have an influence on CEO pay. Okay, so we argue that I think the effect is going to be negative. Okay, and there are several ways to explain the negative effect of EPL on CEO pay. So the first thing is the insurance channel, and the second thing is the bargaining power. Okay, so in terms of insurance channel, so what does it mean? So in the literature, the CEO pay is actually determined by many things. Okay, so the first thing is like how much they can generate value for firms. Okay, but on the other hand, the board have to ensure that they need to have a certain pay, even though the firm value couldn't hit the KPI. It is similar like workers, right? So we got some kind of a fixed component, right? And we got some kind of variable component, right? Variable component is gonna be for incentivize you to be more productive. So similarly for CEO as well, okay? So in the CEO, there's gonna be some fixed component and some variable components. So the fixed component here would depend on how much CEO be able to control their activities, that means their decision, right? How much discretion they can do for firms. So we argue that in the environment with a very stringent EPL, okay, so CEO got restriction. They couldn't really lay off 20% right away, okay? So if it's the case, then what is the reason? So if the company perform poorly, then they're gonna blame that, oh, it's not my fault, right? This is because of the restriction from the government that I couldn't respond timely to the market condition. Okay, and because of that, I need more insurance, right? I need more larger portion of fixed pay because a lot of variation in firm performance is not under my control. Okay, so a lot of things out of my control. So we argue that in the insurance channel, the more I would say the higher level of out of control, right, of the CEO, the higher level of fixed payment that I'm going to require. Okay, so based on this hypothesis, we argue that CEO pay is going to be have a higher fixed components, lower variable. And if it's lower variable in aggregate, it's going to be lower level as well. That means this is a lower CEO pay. Okay. Okay, another channel that we try to, to use to explain the negative effect is the bargaining power. So CEO pay is actually not just, I think not just only determined by CEO themselves, right? Even though there's a lot of evidence that CEO have a very strong, power on how to determine their pay. So we're arguing here that there are many factors or many stakeholders that can have an effect on CEO pay. For example, unions, creditors, and the board. Of course, the board would be the main party here. So whenever in the environment where workers have more power, right? Like especially in a very high EPL, right? Stringent EPL environment. So in this case, workers have more power, then CEO is gonna have less power to bargain or maybe to demand a very excessive pay or for example, excessive pay rise, okay? So that is another one of the mechanism that we use to explain the negative effect. Okay, so given of time, I'm gonna give you the main findings that we got, right, using the data here. So we got a data set, it covers more than 10,000 firms across 23 OECD countries. The reason that we focus on OECD countries only, because the EPL data we only be able to obtain for OECD countries. And the sample period here is more than 20 years. Right? So we actually show that stricter EPL is actually lower overall CO pay. So it's exactly consistent with our hypothesis. And then we show that in countries with very strict EPL, there's gonna be less equity components, okay, and more fixed component in terms of cash. The pay performance sensitivity also lower. What does that mean? That means if in the US we observe $1 increase in firm value, 20 cents or maybe 20% goes to CO pay. However, we don't see that, right? So we actually is gonna see in the country with low EPL, with high EPL, the sensitivity is actually lower. I mean, the CEO earn less, in proportion to the firm performance. And then we find evidence consistent with the two channels, okay? Insurance channel and the bargaining dynamic channel. Okay, so what would be the key takeaway here, right? So based on our main findings. So the key takeaway that we want to emphasize in our research is that there's actually a trade-off, okay? So the trade-off between the risk-taking excessive role, right? And also the excessive pay. So what does it mean? That means like if the government really interested in restraining, right, the rising CO pay, the other trade-off or the other consequence would be that there's gonna restricting the level of risk-taking, okay? And there is, somehow of the balance between or the compromise between the corporate flexibility and employment protection. So the stronger employment protection, the less flexibility, right, for firms. And because of that, we may see that firm value is lower, CEO taking less risk, okay, and then it's also affecting innovation as well, right? Because we know that, innovation and risk taking, they need to go together. Okay, I think this is, maybe I can skip this. This is just the contribution in the literature so far, that the empirical evidence that they show. So we believe that we actually contributing, providing evidence for the cross-country studies, so we show evidence on this. Okay, so maybe I can skip this as well, but our school actually is quite expensive, this data set. So this is a data set that we can observe, or maybe we can collect the data for CEO compensation for more than 100 countries all over the world. And because of this, we'll be able to conduct the analysis. And then for EPL, we using OECD. However, there's some modification that we follow from earlier publication, that OECD is actually collecting the EPL for every type of contracts. So for us, we actually only focus on the EPL for regular contracts. We don't look at the temporary contracts. So we actually did some extra work to modify the index. Okay, yeah. So given a few minutes, so I just want to give you some numbers. Okay, yeah, very brief. Okay, so here we actually running a regression where the dependent variable is the law, right? We do the transformation of the CO pay. So we got the CO pay here, right? And then the EPL. So the negative relationship showing that higher EPL, that means stronger or stricter employment protection, lower CO pay. And we did that by controlling a lot of factors, right? A lot of factors may matter for CO pay. So we do control for firms, we do control for local economic condition, and then also control for CO characteristics like age, I don't know, maybe gender or tenure, you know, so some characteristic that we can observe. Okay, so here we show this is a firm fixed effect. What does it mean? That we comparing the same firm, okay? So we comparing the same firm over time. So if EPL change in a certain country, right? So how does that change the CO pay? Okay, we can do this. Yeah, so this is the components for equity, okay? So here we see that this is the equity pay. And as you can see, this is the coefficient for equity pay. If we see cash, you know, the coefficient is significantly less. Okay, that means like the EPL is actually reduce the equity components way more than cash components for CO pay. Okay, and then we confirming that when we do equity over total pay, right? So it's actually lower the proportion of equity pay for CO compensation. Okay, so here, this is also important as well to really see. So normally we observe this. What does it mean? That means if firm perform well, right, CO pay is higher. Okay. However, when we do the interaction between high ROA, that means returns on asset, the effect is negative. So basically, in the country with very strict employment protection, $1 that CO pay can increase in firm value, they actually receive less, you know, as compared to the US, right? So that is the reason why we observe that CO is gonna have less incentive in this case, right, to raise firm value. Okay, so we actually have evidence, you know, that consistent with all of this. So what does it mean? That means we show that the effect, depending on labor intensity, is also depending on the demand for insurance. What does it mean? That means we observe that it varies based on CO age, right? The older, the more senior CO, the higher demand for the insurance. And then also for performance volatility. That means it matters more for firms that really volatile, right? Because if they really volatile, let's say technology firms, right? This year they're making profit, next year they make a loss. Like Samsung, I observe, I remember that, you know, they actually very, very volatile over years. So in that case, CO demand higher insurance, okay? Because they say that so many factors out of their control. Okay, I can skip all of this. The bargaining power, right? So in here, we show that some effect on the bargaining power in terms of creditor, union, and CO power. Okay, maybe I can come to the conclusion. So the main key takeaway here is that we show in countries with very strict employment protection, they're gonna have lower CO pay. And then another very significant and, you know, finding is that it's not just lower CO pay, it's actually lower equity components in the CO. And the literature has been shown that the equity component is the motivation for firms to take risk, okay? So if firm got high, very variable components, they're more likely to take risks and they become more innovative, okay? So we want to highlight that the most important things we want to highlight for the I think, policy backing, right? That the corporate flexibility and worker protection, there's some trade-off. Okay, so we need to be balanced well between these two factors. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your listening. And yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was quite interesting. While we've diverted off the topic of climate change, I think the topic of risk and the concept of trade-offs and balancing and ensuring equity is a kind of theme and topic we should be thinking about in all aspects of risk theory. So I would like to hand over to our discussant. I'm so sorry. To our discussant, Uchida Sensei. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful conference. My name is Konari Uchida. I'm from Waseda University. I really like this paper, and I also have very interests about the relationship between the labor market and the CEO pay. But after listening to today's presentation, I realized that we have some very different reasons why we like this topic. So I'm presenting the one principle from the recent Japanese corporate governance code. Actually, so now Japanese government thinks we need to, improve or reform about the CEO pay. CEO pay is really important in the corporate governance. And then Professor Nhan today emphasized that excessive CEO pay in US is a very big problem and it causes crimes, right? But in Japan, we don't think that kind of the high CEO pay causes crimes. So maybe that kind of thing is not going on in Japan because, the Japanese CEO pay used to be low, much lower than the US actually. And then, so what Japanese government is emphasizing recently, so you can look at the red point of this principle. So government thinks board of directors need to support risk-taking. So we need to take more risk because the risk-taking is important for innovation. We need more innovation, so we need more risk-taking. So this is the standpoint of the recent Japanese government. So what we can do to promote risk-taking of the companies, one solution will be, so we have to get more incentive, so equity compensations for CEOs. So if the CEO get equity compensation, so they have an incentive to promote risk-taking, and then so they might produce big innovation. So this is a recent discussion in the Japanese corporate governance, actually. So this is my standpoint. This is the reason why I like this topic. Executive compensation package is very important to induce risk-taking, which lead to innovation. So what Professor Nhan found in a very excellent empirical study, so she's looking at the many companies' CEO compensation, and important variable here is employment protection. So looking at the relationship between employment protection and CEO pay, so if you go right-hand side, the employees are more well protected. And then what they found is CEO pay significantly declined if the employees are very well protected by law. Okay? And then another important thing is the proportion of equity pay also reduced when employees are well protected by the law. Actually, I think Japan is very right-hand side. The employment protection is very strong. So the law researchers I know always say that it's really hard for Japanese companies to lay off workers. Even though they are in a very difficult situation, there are lots of restrictions to fire workers. So that is one reason why the Japanese companies cannot do the drastic restructuring, even during the very difficult time. This might be the reason why Japanese companies cannot do the significant innovation, because they cannot take risk, because they cannot fire workers even when they fail in research and development activities or something. So it's quite different from the US companies. So meanwhile, if the employees' protection are weak, yes, innovation will be good, risk-taking is good, but perhaps, as you said, maybe there is another problem. So CEO will be able to get excessive pay, which might cause, crime or some big social problems. Then another important finding in this paper is about why this relationship occurs between employment protection and CEO pay. The number one channel is the insurance channel, which means when the employees are protected very well, the companies cannot fire workers, so they cannot flexibly respond to the difficult situation in the economy. As a result, CEO pay will be risky. So the companies need to reduce the risk of the CEO pay, to protect or to satisfy the risk-averse CEOs. And actually, they found that this relationship between employment protection and CEO pay is strong for CEOs who need insurance, like labor-intensive companies, volatile companies, and also young CEOs. And then another important finding is about bargaining channel. So the paper argues that the relationship between employment protection and CEO pay is coming from bargaining power of the CEO. And actually, so they found the relationship is strong when the CEO has the weak bargaining power. When the CEO is not chairman of the board, or when the debt holders doesn't strictly monitor the company, or when the union is not so strong. So I really like this paper, and I think that this paper highlights very important issue, which is the relationship between the labor market and the CEO pay. And then I also think this paper has very important policy implications, of course for US, but of course, and also for the Japanese market, this is pretty important paper. So today, yes, I have two types of comments. Number one is the policy-related questions, and then another one is more some academic specific comments, but I want to focus on the policy-related questions. So number one question is, so I want to make sure about my understanding about this paper, the implication for Japan, okay? So Japanese government should loosen the labor protection to promote innovation. This is my understanding. And then, so I want to ask you, this is really correct understanding or not, okay? And then if this is true, I want to know, how quickly the employment protection law reform can change executive pay and lead to innovation. So the paper looks like assuming that the environmental protection law, if it is changed, the executive pay is immediately changed. So I feel that the paper assumes so. But I'm not sure whether or not that kind of legal reform actually immediately change the executive pay or not. So, and also, there might be some, opposite relationship from the executive pay change and the CEO try to lobby to the government to change the employment protection law. So I want to know the possibility about the opposite reverse causality possibility. And then another thing is, so I want to make sure more about bargaining versus insurance. My understanding is, so insurance is very based on the basic economics model because the CEO is risk averse. And so when a company is risky, the lower risk compensation is the best contract between the shareholders and the CEO. However, bargaining sounds like CEOs can extract rent, and then they can get excessive compensation, which cannot be justified in optimal contract. So I want to make sure about this understanding, and then I want to ask you, your result is suggesting that the weak employment protection can cause the excessive compensations as well as rationally high compensations. And yes, so let me skip the first one, but actually, so I'm not so super clear about the bargaining story because my understanding is the CEO pay is basically determined in the board of directors who are representatives of shareholders, right? So basically, economics model is assuming that the CEO pay is determined by negotiation between the shareholders and the CEO. So I don't clearly understand why the employment protection empowered or, reduce the power of CEO because CEO is not negotiating with employees directly, right? So I want to know more about some bargaining environment. So what kind of bargaining is going on in your model to determine the CEO pay, okay? And then so finally, I want to emphasize this point, especially when thinking about Japanese corporate governance. I think in the countries with very strong employment protection, I think the inside management succession is very, very popular, rather than the outside CEO appointments. So let me give you one, striking example of that. One of the very famous Japanese companies, Nippon Steel, the largest steel maker in Japan, which recently acquired US Steel. Okay, and then so the CEO of this company joined this company in 1979, and then became CEO in 2024, right? So this is 45 years or something, right? Stay in the same company, right? But this is kind of common in the lifelong employment system in Japan, and I think this is related to the employment protection, I think. And then I think that when the inside management succession is very common, I think the pay tend to be low because the competition is limited inside the company, right? And so my impression is that the employment protection will be related to the inside management succession, and the limited competition might be the direct reason why the CEO pay is low. And then so I want to ask you about the opinions or how you think about this, the factor like inside versus outside manager appointments. So anyway, so I really enjoyed reading your paper. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from your paper. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that the case study of Japan is a very interesting point of discussion, especially compared to the United States. I would like to invite both the speaker and the discussant to sit up front here. First, I would like to invite Dr. Lee to respond, perhaps, or add to the discussion that was given, and then I would like to open the floor to the audience for comments and questions.
Yeah, so first of all, I actually really would like to express my very sincere thanks, to Professor Uchida in terms of very insightful discussion. He didn't show some other slide that he had, but what does it tell me? That I think this is one of the best discussion, I would say, I received so far, because so far, if when we present and if we just receive 2 or 3 comments that valuable, I think that's actually a success for your presentation already, because they really raise something valuable. But I think this discussion, I would say, is super, super excellent. I think maybe because he's actually shared some research interests in the same of CEO pay. So that is the reason why she raised so many, insightful comments, to be honest. Yeah, so I'm very impressed, and really thank, to your suggestion. So I think in terms of the Japan, right, I hope that I'm going to learn more based on my co-authorship with Professor Shikimi, hopefully learn more about Japan corporate governance environment. But from what you said is that it's more on the right side, more labor protection. I think on the left, if we say about politically, so more labor protection. So I agree with you, right? So I think if the incentive here is about risk taking, right, promote firm to take more risk, then definitely the government should think that they should allow CEO more authority, right? More flexibility in terms of how they're gonna respond to shocks, okay? Because otherwise, there's gonna the consequence would be that they become so conservative, right? So I agree with that. And then maybe the income inequality that the government may need to do in another way, right? Instead of directly restrain CEO pay, they may, I don't know, maybe restructure the income distribution channel, right? Where they can do in terms of I don't know, maybe unemployment benefit, right? So then they be able to fix the social problem like inequality in another way instead of restricting corporate flexibility, right? Yeah, so this is my, my personal thinking. I think another one in terms of the bargaining, I agree with you, I totally agree. Because when I do the hypothesis development, I can easily pull out the economic model, right, to support the insurance channels. But I couldn't find, to be honest, exactly like what you said, I couldn't find the real theoretical model that can explain the bargaining power. So
if you looked at the pay gap, maybe the bargaining,
Mhm.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
The employees.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
now you look at only the CEO pay,
Mhm.
one side only, right?
Yeah.
That's my concern.
Yeah, I agree with that. So maybe we will think about this, whether we should rely on the bargaining power. Maybe it's just about the heterogeneity analysis, where we see that CEO pay can vary based on some other stakeholder as well, and maybe it's based on the agency theory. So the agency theory here is saying that if there is some high level of agency cost, then the rent extractions can be more, right? And then stakeholder may matters here. Yeah, so that may be another way to to kind of rephrase the hypothesis. But I agree with that. And in terms of union and creditors, so there may be not the direct evidence how they gonna affect CO pay, but maybe what we thinking is like in a situation where they have to respond to shock, right? And the board is gonna consider various solutions, right? And in the case that they understand that union have a very strong power, it may indirectly affect the board decision in this case. But I agree with you. It's hard to see the direct influence on CO pay because they don't vote, right? Like except Germany. so I learned from German that from Germany that union have a representative in the board. Yeah. So in that case, they may have the direct effect. Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you. Yeah.
great. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to open the floor to comments and questions.
Oh, thank you so much for your presentation. It's really eye-opening. First time reading this kind of paper. Thank you so much. And I'm just wondering, CEO pay is high, as all we know, but also celebrity and also, let's say, athletes. Can your study apply the same theory to those who get really high pay based on the merits, right? Can you expand your study in that way?
Yeah, thank you for very interesting questions. I think to some extent, right? Because I think the gap between CEO pay and workers also depending on, I would say, in terms of talent, right? So how much talent and effort that CEO put in compared to the workers. So if the tail becomes just so small, like less than 1%, 0.1%, right? That you can get to the level of a certain celebrity or athletes, then the gap is gonna be higher. So I agree to some extent. Maybe there can be maybe you better answer. Maybe some theory model that may be able to explain a similar pattern in that case. Because if the gap is higher, what does it mean? That it's actually is gonna exaggerate the effort, the level of effort, right? So in order to get to a certain level of pay, there's going to be substantially, effort that they be able to get. However, I agree with you that there's going to be a lot way more like social media, it's not much about effort. Yeah, it's just about how popular they are, in media. So yeah, but I think it's maybe a small portion may be able to explain it. Yeah.
similar to what you just say. So let's say Elon Musk, he's an innovator. He actually created a company. He make it public. So he become a CEO. How are you going to differentiate that with a sort of like, somebody 1%, 0.01% of merits? How are you going to argue with that somebody who actually innovate the company and become a CEO, and versus like other people who just hire as a salary and just regular CEO? And I'm just wondering, when you say pay, what is the definition of pay? For example, they get a lot of incentives, such as, other than just a salary incentive, they get a lot of stock options and things like. Is that including as a payment, or you just barely this physical structure of the payment that they get per yearly?
Yeah, so in our study, the CEO pay including both, right? Both components, so everything in the compensation package. So it's actually also including fixed component and variable components. So as we observe that the matters here is like the variable components, right? So the adjustment, yeah, I think relating to your question as well in terms of adjustment, the reason why we believe that we may observe the effect right away is because of the variable components. Because in the variable components, it's not just about the stock option. It's also about a lot of bonus that can be decided, I don't know, in the middle of the year or the end of the year, or maybe some perks, okay? So this is maybe more, I would say more responsive, right, to the change of the policy. But I agree with you, in order to have an effect on the fixed component would be take times, right? There's some lag effect. Yeah. I think you got some questions.
Sorry, my question is a very fundamental question, so it may not be very deep. Just curious to know that what has AI and IoT or the rise of these industries to do with the CEO worker pay gap? I think the CEO worker pay gap discussion, which we observe in the newspapers and reports, especially after the AI and IoT have gained some momentum as an industry, or like, social media. I'm also like aligning my question with the last question the person asked here about Elon Musk. So those kind of sectors are probably because they're able to, they have the company is actually probably formed by a few people who have the core of knowledge, and the rest of the supporting workers' knowledge and talent probably doesn't match, or I don't know, I'm not sure to what extent. But my question is this one, like, how does this AI and IoT or the social media as an industry, how their rise has contributed to this CEO worker pay gap?
Yeah. So I think I think that's a very interesting question. But it's hard to really say. Yeah, so I think like it may be interesting to see a study, right? To really see when we do a sample period analysis, and then maybe factoring, the certain development. If we be able to see the variation in AI adoption across countries, then yeah, I think it can be very interesting to see how does that affect the gap. Yeah, and I think in terms of Elon Musk, I think for us as a researcher, these cases are going to be treated as outlier, because it's very hard to say is it correct or right or wrong in this case. Why? Because it's an outlier. There is no comparison, right? So then how can we say it's right, or how can we say it's wrong? So I think that is the reason that is really debatable whenever we talk about CEO. So to be honest, when I later on publish this, we need to be very careful, like political in this case, I would say, in terms how we phrase the word, because I think in the literature they very try to avoid using the word excessive CEO pay. I would have to admit that, because there's a lot of tension, right? Some part of the scholar believe so, right? Believe that there is evidence that CEO pay is way too excessive. But other part, they really believe that corporate environment knows what they are doing. Okay, the market decide what they are doing. The market is correct. Okay, so this is a very, very debatable topic in our literature. So I think especially Elon Musk, I don't think that even the researcher be able to say is this correct or not. But personal thinking that I'm thinking is that I don't say it's excessive pay, but what I'm thinking is the Elon Musk can earn a lot when Tesla, gain momentum, value creation. However, what happens if tomorrow it goes bankrupt? Right? All of the wealth that they receive from Elon Musk, whether it's going to be returned to shareholders? No, right? So I think in this case, I think if we do calculation, then we should somehow do the average, right? Average of the own scenario, right? So I agree that, there might be 10% that the value of Tesla is going to be, I don't know, 100 billion. However, there's going to be some percentage, it can go to zero, right? I think like Tesla especially facing significant competition right now from China, right? So the risk of bankruptcy, right? No longer people buy Tesla, or maybe some political tension that people stop buying Tesla, right? So in this case, they also can go bankrupt quickly. I mean, you never know. So would that have been factored in the package or not, right? So I don't have a chance to be in the board, right? But of course, I cannot raise that question. But I believe that it looks like they haven't factored this, the wealth that Elon Musk is going to receive, not going to be returned to shareholders, right? When they go bankrupt. So, yeah, so this is just my personal thought, but yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm so sorry, I'm a layman in this topic, and I couldn't refrain myself asking this question. I want to push a little bit you on your assumption that on not only your assumption. I think it's a capitalist world assumption about that that the CEO creates single-handedly the value. So and I really cannot buy this idea that one person can create that kind of value. Take, for example, your case with Elon Musk. He's the last company launching rocketing. He recruited from different parts of the world and from different companies within the US to create that company. So I don't think that he creates the value single-handedly. So how do you take this this problem and is it the right way to think that one man creates everything?
Yeah. I think like from a socialist, right, point of view, that this is actually the very common argument. That so that is the reason why they say that value creation at the firm level need to be distributed equally, right, with the workers as well, right? So I think look at the statistic that we look from the very first slide, right? Workers, they don't really enjoy any value creation so far for the 30 years on average. Okay, so I totally buy your argument. So what we were thinking as a research point of view is that we got in the distribution here, we got US is very extreme, right? And then I think firms in Europe is another extreme. So I would think that, maybe somewhere in the middle would be the best, but deciding where is the middle is not an easy answer. But I think at the government level, I would say if you be able to target something in the middle would be the best. That means like some essential protection is important, but not too much. Right. When it goes too much, like European countries, right? I think like France or Italy, they're facing a lot of economic problem right now, right? One of the problem can be employment protection is way too much. That actually kill a lot of incentive for firms to do innovation, to take risk. So I believe somewhere in the middle would be the best. Yes, more moderate policy. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'd like to give one more round of applause to all of our speakers for today. Thank you. Please go ahead and take your seats if you would like. Due to the timing, I'd like to just very quickly conclude today's session. I think both of the presentations, I think while very different, do complement each other in some ways, especially in terms of the topic of inequality and transition in general. I think while one focused more on the energy transition and climate security, the other focused on labor institutions and corporate governance. I think together they both can highlight how risk intersects with policy, markets, and institutions. So thank you again to all of our presenters and discussants for this session. Thank you.